The easiest way to graph the line is to first get y by itself. So I'll subtract 3x from both sides. And now I can explicitly see that the slope is -3, or -3/1, and the y-intercept is -3. So I plot the y-intercept and use the slope to find another point. Down 3 and to the right 1, and I have graphed the line. To find the slope and y-intercept of this line would be, I would do the same thing I would if I wanted to graph it. I would solve for y. So I will subtract 2x from both sides. And then divide both sides by -1, so that I get y equals 1 plus 2x. So the slope is 2 and the y-intercept is 1. And though they don't ask me to graph it, I will start with the y-intercept of 1, and then I use the slope of rise 2, run 1. And that would be the graph. To find the equation of the line with these characteristics, I would first remember that the equation of a line follows the template y equals mx plus b. I know the slope is 3/2, so I replace the m with that. The only thing left to find is the y-intercept. So I will plug 10 in for x and 5 in for y, since 10 is the x-coordinate of a point and 5 is the y-coordinate of that same point. And so I can now write the equation of the line, which will be y equals 3/2 x minus 10. If I were to graph that line, I would notice that it does have a slope of 3/2, and it does go through the point 10, 5. To do this problem, I must recognize that whether or not lines are perpendicular or parallel has pretty much everything to do with their slopes. So it will help if I know the slope of the line that I've been given. To determine the slope, I must isolate y. So I do this. Notice that the 8/9 becomes positive because I divide a negative by a negative, and the 2/9 becomes positive for the same reason. The slope is 8/9. And so to answer question A, what is the slope of a line perpendicular to this line? It would have to be this slope flipped over and its sign changed. If the 8/9 had been negative, then my answer would be positive. For part B, the slope of a parallel line would just be what we started with, 8/9. Parallel lines have the same slope, and perpendicular lines have slopes that are flipped over with the sign changed. To determine the answers to these, we need to know the slopes of each line. To do that, we must have y by itself in each equation. In the first equation, the slope is 5/3. I know that because y is already by itself. In the second equation, I solve for y. And I get a slope of -3/5 for the second equation. For the third equation, divide both sides by 5, and I get a slope of 3/5. So the first equation and the second equation are perpendicular, because if I take one of their slopes, flip it over and change the sign, I get the other slope. The third equation is not parallel to either of them because it doesn't have the same slope as either of them, nor is it perpendicular to them. This problem really helps to motivate our understanding of slope and y-intercept. What is the change in the total cost for each book printed? Whenever we talk about a ratio or the change of things happening, we are talking about the slope. The slope in this problem is 10, or 10/1. The numerator of the slope tells us how y changes, and the denominator tells us how x changes. In this problem, y stands for the cost of publishing a book, and x stands for the number of books that are printed. So it would be a cost of $10 for each one book. So the slope in this problem means $10 per book to publish. And that would be the value right there. Now the y-intercept always tells us the starting amount of anything. The starting amount of the publishing costs is $1,100 before we even publish one book, because every business has startup costs. You have to start buying things before you can sell things, and that is how this works.